Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's Uome again here. This time I'm going to start a new series which is going to be my reviews on different sections of tanks or different types of tanks. My first video is going to be on the IS series of tank. It will work its way down from the IS-1 all the way down to the IS-4M. I will be excluding the T10M from this bracket, though many people may presume or think that it belongs in this sort of review. However, I will be covering this most likely in a separate review category under the name of likely T series. Yes, I know, jokes all around. Subscribe to PewDiePie. Overall, what do you get out of the IS-1 tank? Overall, in my eyes, it's always been a slightly heavier, slightly slower, harder hitting version of the T-34-85 D5T or the other T-34-85. It retains its normal gun, the D5T cannon, off of the T-34-85s here and here, and it gains extra armor over the T-34-85. The overall armor layout of the IS series of tank does stretch over to the IS-2, so the hull is exactly the same. The only one that it does change on is the IS-2 Mod 1944, which we will get onto. So, overall, front upper plate, 120mm, slope back at a 35 degree, giving it an effective thickness of around about 140mm on level terrain with the gun. The sides angled back at 19 degrees. Of course, this is angled back on the level playing field upwards like slopes would be, but not to the side at all. So the effective thickness, unfortunately, we cannot tell what the degree is it's sloped backwards angling, but I can say that it is sloped backwards upwards at 19 degrees. Its effective thickness is in the 200 mark, 200mm, so generally you will not want to shoot this tank here. Generally where you want to shoot for is the side faces of the IS-1's turret. This is generally where it is the weakest, and this is generally where you will inflict the most damage, because a lot of ammunition is stored within the turret, especially if you splash back at the rear of the turret or along this side of the turret. Of course, that can be depleted by taking lower ammunition counts. My current reload on this vehicle is 8.5 seconds. That is of course with an upgraded crew. I have not got it spaded, so you can likely get it even better than this, but that is the number that I have on it right now. The negative gun depression is -5 degrees. Pretty okay, to be fair, for a Russian tank, a Russian heavy tank that is. Vertical guidance of 25 degrees positive from level ground playing field. 10 degrees second rotation speed of the turret. It weighs 44 tons with a powertrain of 460 horsepower at 2000 RPM. It can get up to 42 kilometers an hour, and you can get this higher downhill. I have managed to do it. 102% visibility. Obviously we don't know what this is originally based off of, so to us this means nothing. Gauge in, fix, please. The pen does maintain, for the stock round at least, the 147mm of pen that you see on the D5T cannon here. Of course you can get better rounds, such as the BR365A, which though it has less pen, it does have higher angled pen retention than the original round. However, the original round is just good enough. You can probably get away with this round for a large lengthy amount of time, because generally you're not going to be penning 49mm at 60 degrees anyway, because all vehicles will have more than that effective thickness at that degree. In terms of the APCR round, it's always good to carry at least 2 or 3 of these rounds in any tank you're in, and I will say this for any vehicle, simply because you will occasionally come across vehicles which have heavy armor amounts that you need to slap a very high velocity, very high penning round against to do any damage. In terms of the HE, it's nothing really impressive. Generally I wouldn't take it, apart from maybe 2 or 1 round, just for if you happen to be able to load it to take out a lightly armoured vehicle. In terms of what you should research in order, it goes parts, FPE, and then you want to go for the new round, just for in case you want a backup round with more angled pen. Then you want to move for all of the gun performance modifications. Last but not least, all of the performance upgrades in terms of your manoeuvrability, with APCR falling in at a short last. Crew replenishment, of course, being a whenever you want to get it sort of a replenishment. Moving on to the IS-2. The IS-2 in my eyes is the IS-1, but they have decided to slap a massive 122mm in it at a whopping 5.7 BR. Overall, the gun's performance is amazing at this tier. 205mm of flat penetration at 0 meters is definitely more than capable at 5.7. Even in a full tier, you'll find yourself one-shotting through the turret sides of Tiger II Henschels. Overall, there isn't much to say about its armour layout. If you want to know its armour layout, go back to the previous part of this video, which was on the IS-1, since the layout is exactly the same in every single way, unless you're discounting the mantlet, as you can see here. Apart from that, weaknesses stay exactly the same. It is still effectively the same tank in terms of how you use it. The only thing you do need to be wary about is a 24-second reload. You have 9.8 degrees a second of turret rotation, which is fair enough for this sort of tier and this sort of caliber of gun. You have -3 degrees of gun depression, which generally you'll start to see a trend in this onwards with the IS series of tank. They will all maintain this slow turret traverse, which unfortunately does. Unfortunately, you do only have -3 degrees of gun depression in this vehicle, and this is unfortunately a trend that does carry along the entirety of the rest of the IS series of tank, discounting the T10M. You have 20 degrees of vertical elevation on your gun from the ground level mark. This vehicle weighs 46 tons with a power plant of 460 horsepower at 2000 RPM. Nothing different from the IS-1 at all there, apart from a worse horsepower to ton ratio, since this vehicle does weigh 2 tons extra. Again, 102% visibility, much like the IS-1. The same top speed, this vehicle is capable of achieving exactly the same performance in terms of level straightforward speed as the IS-1 is. In terms of the penetration on the default round, it is more than adequate of dealing with every single tier in an up tier, your tier and a down tier. The HE filler is more than enough to annihilate any tank as soon as you pen it. You will generally be getting one-shots all of the time with this weapon. The upgraded round, generally I would only say take it if you aren't worried about money, since generally the improvement is almost pointless apart from if you just have the money to spend generally, and generally I will run this round because I personally have enough to run it and I have no worry about the future of my bank account in this game. Overall, the HE does get much better over the IS-1 with 45mm of pen at 10 meters on 0 degrees. Overall, I would recommend you load at least 3 of these rounds, maybe 2 of them if you're a bit worried about getting ammo racked. Generally though, I wouldn't advise taking them anyway, simply because you do have your 24-second reload, and generally you want to load a round which could pen any possible target that you can come across, since generally low armoured vehicles you can hull break with your normal BR471B or BR471. We are now moving on to the IS-2 Mod 1944, as it used to be called. Overall, the main change for this vehicle over the IS-2 and IS-1 predecessors is the upper frontal plate, which you will see maintains the 120mm frontal plate, as you see on this one, but it is stretched down to the lower frontal plate, creating a join between the seams here. Overall, your effectiveness is in the 210mm range, however it does increase the further up you go, all the way up to 230mm roughly on an average. The sides maintain their effectiveness front on, and you generally don't want to angle with this vehicle, and that goes the same for the IS-2 and the IS-1, since they all maintain this pike nose sort of idea, which you see a lot more prevalent in the IS-3 series of tank. The gun overall maintains its normal rounds that you saw on the IS-2, 205mm of flat penetration, and I do believe it does maintain, yep, the exact same rounds, the exact same upgraded. Again, I won't say much on whether or not you should take this vehicle. I won't say much on whether or not you should take this round over this round, as the IS-2 is exactly the same in terms of what rounds you can unlock. Same for the HE, I have just said what you need to do with that, and your general playstyle along ammunition loadouts for this vehicle. Again, modifications, it goes in the same range as the IS-1, and that goes for the IS-2 as well. You want to go parts, FPE, all of your turret modifications, and as soon as you can, you want to get your upgraded round, just for if you do want to take it, and then I would continue your way down and finish off with your manoeuvrability upgrades, finally coming to add-on armour and crew replenishment. There is, however, one big old weakness which is now prevalent on the IS-2 compared to the previous series of tank, which is the driver's port right here. If you shoot this flat section right here, you can actually pen through the front. It is only 129mm effectiveness. I will finish off with the IS-2 by going over the final gradings for the side armour, rear armour, top armour and under armour quickly now, since all hulls are exactly the same apart from the frontal sloping on the IS-2 mod 1944. Overall, side armour is a conglomeration of 90mm for the engine deck, transmission, etc. Then you have your crew compartment, which slopes up from 100mm down to 115, down to 130, down to 115, and then your frontal plate, which is 120 sloped downwards. General places for side engagement: suspension shots, general just side, turret shots. In terms of rear engagement, generally you can shoot anywhere on the rear, though I would avoid the rear gunner port since occasionally you can get some relatively weird points on it, as you can see here, 457mm of effectiveness, and I generally wouldn't risk shooting here just for the chance of possibly getting gauge-ined. The engine deck, generally though it is sloped, you will not generally bounce here and you can go straight through and demobilise the tank, though generally I would recommend shooting centre rear turret. Top bays, 30mm, pretty average to be fair, for a vehicle of its size and calibre being a heavy tank. Generally any sort of HE rounds hitting the cupola of a high enough calibre will go through that and kill it. I have died a few times to that, though it is nothing to be too worried about on this tank, unlike on the IS-3 series of tank, which we will get onto in a minute. Engine bay retains exactly the same thickness, though generally if you are slamming a HE shell against this thing, you want to slam it above the top of the turret, if you have enough pen. Lower glacis, 100mm. Generally another weak spot for all of the IS-2 series of tank. My overall personal experience with the IS-2 series and IS-1 series of tank, less so the IS-1 series, is a passive aggressive support role. The main reason I say support role is because of your reload of the 25.7 second reload on this one, though I do have a upgraded crew so it would normally be longer on a stock loadout. Generally you want to play alongside friends if possible, or you want to stick as close to your group, which is not impossible with this tank due to its manoeuvrability not being exactly poor and its top speed being relatively good for a heavy tank. We are now moving on to the IS-3 series of tank, which straight away off of the bat you can probably notice one thing about its upper frontal glacis compared to the IS-2 series of tank, and that is the prevalence of the pike nose design on the IS series of tank, which comes and goes along the IS series line, especially between the IS-4M and the IS-6, both maintaining some sort of a trait and attribute relatable to this pike nose design, as well as perhaps and arguably some of the IS-2 designs. Overall, the gun does maintain the 122 standard, which seems to be rather prevalent in all Russian heavy tanks of this era, or around this area of World War II. The gun does perform relatively similar to all other IS series of gun that I have showed you so far, apart from the 85 D5T1. The only difference being that you do get a new shell with this one, aside your normal B and standard, which is the D version. This one has a flat pen of 230mm at 0 degrees, however at normal engagement ranges of 100 meters, 227mm of flat, and 60 degrees of penetration it has 78mm of pen. This is more than adequate to deal with almost every single vehicle at this tier in some way or another from the front, and the explosive filler in all three of these shells is more than enough to one-shot generally everything that you fight. This vehicle maintains the 460 horsepower power plant of the IS-2 predecessors and weighs 48 tons, so it is similar to the IS-2 mod 1944. Another thing that I forgot to mention on the mod 1944 IS-2 is the appearance of the Dishka 12.7mm. This is very effective on both variants of vehicles and future vehicles against lightly armoured vehicles, especially Italian designs that you will fight upon playing this vehicle. In a frontal engagement, generally you will be fighting a frontal plate on level ground with an average thickness of around 220mm. Obviously this does increase as you go further along, apart from the very far out edges, which do actually reduce in curved angles, but however do still maintain their effectiveness in a rough proportionate idea to the main front or upper plate. The lower plate by many is seen as a weakness, however myself recently I have not been seeing this being a weakness of this tank, and I do not see it as the main weakness. The main weakness, now becoming a lot more prevalent over the IS-2 series, is the shot trap here. This is generally how you will die in this vehicle, since what a round tends to do is it tends to travel in, like my cursor is here, hit this and bounce down. Unfortunately, you do have over the driver's hatch a 30mm plate, which is very thin, but they are very well sloped if you are shooting straight at that. Another weak spot is if you can slam it just about, because most guns can pen over 200mm at this tier, just here at the turret ring, which is generally 200mm of rough effectiveness on level terrain. Another weakness that I have came across, especially for HESH shells, high caliber HESH shells, even some small ones in many cases, is the top roof compartment, which I do believe in real life would have been used for maintaining the gun and checking it is in adequate working condition. Crew spacing has unfortunately gotten worse, so any penetrating shells will most likely kill this tank in a single hit, simply because of the amount of ammunition strayed loosely around the back of the turret and within the main fighting compartment. Along with charges, overall side profile of the IS-3 tank is generally you want to stay away from the side of the turret, which is where it tends to be the most bouncy. However, you can pen here with a lucky few shots, such as here, 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 here. These just being a few of many different places you could pen. However, where possible, I would recommend you go for a suspension shot, which is just 90mm, and as you can see leads directly into the fighting compartment, and some ammunition straight upon the floor. One thing which I did forget to mention a bit earlier on is this vehicle now has an 85% visibility, which is a bit strange considering that the IS-2 tank is generally seen as the smaller tank, but I would imagine this is down to the lower profile of the tank, and I would imagine the overall visibility for all tanks is done off of height of a vehicle, which would explain why the mouse is such a highly visible. The reason I say engage suspension shots is because the side armour, though 90mm, and though from the side it looks like a flat piece of 90mm plating, it is unfortunately not. Now I cannot actually find the real effectiveness. The effectiveness of this sloping, of course being from directly side on, 190 to 180 roughly millimeters of rolled homogeneous armour. For engaging this vehicle in the rear, I would generally recommend you fire at the engine compartment and then you go for a back of the turret shot. The reason I say you do not engage the back of the turret first, though you can generally do it in many scenarios, is because if you do not somehow pen the back of the turret, he's not able to run away. As long as you knock out this engine, he then cannot run away, and because of his horrible turret reverse of 6.4 degrees a second, they are not able to return fire easily. General top armour for this vehicle is generally above average, discounting the ports for the main gun, and directly above where you would imagine the commander to sit. Of course, engine deck, 20mm average, not very good, though generally you will not be killed this way. I have died a few times to HE shells hitting right here, exploding downwards and somehow managing to shrapnel into my fighting compartment, detonating ammunition and charges. Of course, with this vehicle you have a 23-second reload. Of course this is with an upgraded crew, -3 degrees of gun depression on level ground, and a plus vertical guidance of 20 degrees vertical from level ground. Moving on to the IS-4M, you'll notice one thing in comparison to the IS-3, and that is the sudden disappearance of the pike nose. However, it does maintain the side pieces which you see so prevalent on the IS-3 tank, right here and here. General rules of engagement is almost exactly the same as the IS-3 here, and where possible there is a large weakness on the upper frontal plate right here, which is only 180mm of rough thickness. The upper frontal plate on level combat field is on an average of roughly 260mm all the way up to 290. We're going to round it up to 300mm of effectiveness. Sides in excess of 500. This is a no-go area even for vehicles such as Object 120s in many scenarios, and even their heat rounds. Sides of the turrets are also a no-go area, and even the mantlet is very strong. Again, this vehicle does maintain the 12.7mm Dishka, which is useful again versus light armoured vehicles such as the Italian vehicles which you see so prevalent at this rank. Lower glacis on this vehicle is not a weakness, with an average of 232mm going down to 225. The seam between the two joints is generally also a no-go area, since I seem to have some sort of clipping issue here, where it will actually have to go through the lower glacis and the upper glacis. Reload for this tank on my crew is currently 24 seconds. Negative guidance on level playing field of -3 degrees, nothing new here. And a positive elevation on level ground of 19 degrees. An 8.3 degrees a second turret rotation. And again, for rounds that this vehicle can carry, it can carry every single type of the standard round ammunition, but it does also get this new upgraded 230mm penning at 0 degree at 10 meters, which is also prevalent on the IS-3 series of tank. In terms of general engagements for this vehicle, I have had many a time where people can actually slot in around here, which is only effective to 200mm, and there is not any double layering here. So this is just effective at 200mm, though occasionally the breach can eat it, due to it being an absolutely humongous breach, though generally it won't, and you will lose 2 crew members or a single crew member in the process, depending on which side, and possibly even ammo rack, due to the displacement of random ammunition strewed around the turret and fighting compartment, including the drivers. On top of this, I would also recommend trap shots, and of course, the driver's hatch. Overall side engagement is very comparable to the IS-3, generally suspension shots. However, where you can, I would avoid completely shooting at the side of the turret, as this is still effective at 258mm average armour, or around that area. General side shots for the suspension will generally penetrate and kill the tank in a single hit, due to the ammunition and charges being laid upon the floor right here. Overall engagement, or rules of engagement, for the rear of the IS-4M is back of the turret if you have a high enough penning round, because I know many vehicles at this tier do have a high enough penning round to easily melt through this, especially when you look at vehicles such as Tiger 2s, though occasionally if you don't want to risk it, I would also recommend this plate just here, or this plate just here, which gives you a direct shot straight into its transmission and engine. However, if you can manage to get a penetrating hit to the back of the turret, you will generally kill it in a single shot, due to this being the main first stage ammunition for the IS-4M. Overall top armour for this vehicle is a conglomeration of 30mm for the port to access the breach, a conglomeration of 50mm, another 30 over where you would imagine the commander to be sitting, and 30mm strewed about the place over the engine compartment. I thought I would cover the modification research for the IS-3 and IS-4M in the exact same order. First, you want parts, FPE, then you want to go for all of your gun performance ones, and any shells included, especially the BR471D with its improved penetration values, because you will come across moments with the 202mm penning round, or 205 as it now is, where you cannot pen because a lot of frontal armour is just above 200mm. Then I would go ahead and go for all of your manoeuvrability upgrades, as I can say the IS-4M definitely does need it alongside the IS-3 due to them being such heavy machines. Then I would go for your crew replenishment and smoke grenades. Moving on now to the IS-6, which is now the premium. This will be the last one in the video, and it is going to be a little speciality because this is personally a vehicle which does have a place in my heart, simply because of what it used to be, what it is now, and the differences between that. Overall, on a level playing field, when you are up against this vehicle, you have an average on the lower end of the spectrum of roughly 200mm, and on the upper end of the spectrum, 225 we're going to say. The driver's port is no longer a weakness on this tank, as it is now up armoured by an extra 10mm as opposed to the rest of the upper frontal plate. This is not a weak spot, with an average of around about 240mm of rolled homogeneous armour. Sides are a lot weaker than the IS-4Ms, however still more than adequate at its tier of 7.3. Of 100mm slope back at 62 degrees, including the pike nose, which gives it an effective thickness of 350mm on average, down to 330 roughly. Overall sides of this turret are comparable to the side cheeks of 420, going down to 362. Gun mantlet on this vehicle unfortunately is a weak spot of 165mm, of course is sloped back and around at 11 degrees, so the further up you go the higher it gets, and the further down you go the higher it gets. So generally, slap bang right here and you will go through with any gun at this tier. It should generally do the work for you, and you will generally cannon breach, kill the gunner, and kill the commander, and if you are lucky, ammo rack it. Another weak spot from the top is of course the cupolas just up here of just 100mm. If you can slap bang right here in this square block here on either of them, you're only going through 100mm, especially APHE tends to do its work here, and it will detonate at the top, exploding downwards, normally catching ammunition with it, and taking out all 3 crew members. Of course damage is dependent upon your HE filler. Lower glacis is not a weak spot on this vehicle, with an effective thickness of, on the high end of the spectrum, 240, and the low end, 230 on rough average. Side engagement is much like all these late tier IS series of tanks, which is engage the suspension shot. You want to avoid at all costs shooting the side plates, which is 120mm, side on direct 163, so a bit less than the IS-3 and a lot less than the IS-4M, however still able to bounce shells and still able to be a troll. Turret side shots, generally this is something you can do because it does have a low amount of armour, however it can be bouncy just like many of the other IS series of tanks, unlike the IS-1 and IS-2 series. Generally any shots here will kill it, along with any rounds that enter the suspension compartment here, which will generally explode upwards into the turret and kill the driver along ways as well. Generally, ammunition, again, stored along the floor and up in the turret, just like many of the IS series of tank. For rear shots, I would actually advise against shooting the engine compartment, because there have been many times where I have bounced here and here, with the side plates being very similar to the front, but within a lower effectiveness of just 187. However, for the rear of a tank, this is well above average for your average rear armour on a tank, and generally I would advise you shoot the back of the turret, which is around about the 110mm up to the 120, roughly. Generally, this sort of shot will kill the vehicle due to there being ammunition all along here, and if you are using an APHE filler, it will explode and shrapnel down. Along with it being a solid shot, it will generally crumble and spray down the crew compartment, like so. Again, this vehicle does maintain the 12.7mm Dishka, useful for fending off light vehicles, such as at this tier, the Italian vehicles, or any other relatable vehicles. This vehicle comes with a 700 horsepower power plant and weighs 51.1 tons. Maximum speed of 44 kilometers an hour. You are able to get this higher on road, I have found, and there has been moments where I have gotten this vehicle to 50 kilometers per hour. Of course, it might have been on a slight decline down the hill, but you can still do it nonetheless. 102% visibility, average pen 205mm. Of course, there's no need to go over modifications since this is a premium vehicle and all modifications come stock, so I would just advise you tick them all. Luckily with this vehicle, it does actually get a lot of a lower reload of, on my one currently, with my current crew setup, 16.8 seconds of reload time, -3 degrees of gun depression on level fighting terrain, and +20 on level fighting terrain on the vertical, a 13.1 degrees a second of turret rotation, which is very good for this sort of heavy tank, especially at 7.3, which is comparable to the IS-3's 7.3 as well. Overall playstyle for the IS-3 is to play it aggressive but also in a support role, much like the IS-2 series of vehicle. You're a very strong tank, however you do have that trap shot just underneath the turret, as well as your long reload. Where you can, stick with your teammates or play along friends with this vehicle. Overall playstyle for the IS-4M is very similar to the IS-3, perhaps even more needed because of its higher BR and retaining the long reload. Again, main weakness is trap shot just below the turret. However, this is a lot less prevalent on this series of tank and this design than the IS-3s. Generally, again, you want to stick with your teammates or play along with friends when using this vehicle. If you do own the IS-6 tank, then you can play this tank practically however you wish. I play it a lot of the time as my lone wolfing tank, since it can do that quite easily with its relatively low reload in comparison to other IS-3 counterparts, and its personality of constantly being a very bouncy and troll vehicle to fight against. Generally, I would say play this as a lone wolf and have some fun with it. I generally take it out as a first vehicle if you do own this, but I will not say much on this as I know many people will not own this vehicle. It is simply just here because it is an IS-6 or an IS series of tank, which is what this video is all about. I hope you did enjoy. Of course, I know this video was very simplified and I could have gone a lot more in detail, but I want to make a very simplistic sort of a series of different types of tanks, different lines of tanks, different specs of tanks, and their playstyle and general weak points, just for players who are maybe getting into the game or want to have a general basic knowledge of a vehicle. And I didn't feel like making it the longest videos ever and including game clips with the vehicles, as I feel that personally, if you're going for the vehicle, all you need is a description of it and then you can go and play it. Like I have said, I don't need to go ahead and prove this since I have played them myself, and I can hope that you lot have enough trust in me to know that this is how you play these vehicles and this is how they act on the battlefield. Anyway, all's good and ends good. You guys do what you do best, live life, have a good time, and I'll catch you next time.